What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Wanted to talk today about middleweight bikes versus heavyweight bikes. Mainly talking today about my experience from the Triumph Tiger 800 over to the R1250GS 2019 model. Let's get after it. Thanks so much for joining today. Like and subscribe to the content. It really helps. It lets me know that you enjoy the content, and as well, share it with your friends if you found value in it. And let's get into some content. All right, so a couple of differences. I have owned many different types of motorcycles. My most recent ones, I made a transition from the Triumph Tiger 800 over to the R1250GS, the BMW, and absolutely loving it. I was reading a couple of articles, just trying to get my head around some of this stuff. As we jump into this, I know that people are gonna have a lot of opinions about which one they actually like the most. I think they both have their place in the world. It's not a this one or that one. It really has to do with what type of riding you're doing. Jumping in, comparing the Triumph Tiger 800 and my experience there to the R1250GS is really no comparison at all, because it was a 2011 bike and now my new R1250GS is a 2019. So the difference is just so wide, but I'm still gonna do my best to kind of touch on a few things because some people might be interested in the difference. So when it comes down to heavyweight bikes, what are some of the benefits that you're getting from those bikes? So the pros of those bikes, as far as heavyweight goes, the manufacturers of any main company, whether it be Triumph, KTM, or BMW. So when you look at these bikes, you're getting all the key features, right? These are the flagship bikes of these brands. All of the features that you would see in the future on the middleweight bikes, you're seeing first kind of on the flagship bikes, right? I guarantee you that probably you're gonna see adaptive cruise control on a 1250GS, or the 1300GS supposedly is coming out soon. You're gonna see that on that bike first before you would see it on a middleweight bike. So you're getting some of that newer, more forward futuristic tech on those bigger bikes first. Of course, that comes with a much greater price tag as well. And now a lot of people might be saying, okay, well, I could care less because I like the middleweight bikes because they're more in my price point, and that's the kind of bike that I would actually go for. When you get into that lower price point, you are going to have to trade off in some areas. Nowadays though, a lot of the middleweight bikes, you can almost class them up to a lot of the similar tech that you would find as far as the suspension and everything in some of the newer bikes and the newer tech. You have cruise control on a lot of the middleweight bikes now as well. Of course, on my 800, I didn't have cruise control. I didn't have a lot of features. Basically, the only tech I really had on that bike was ABS. That was pretty much all I had. So when you get into the bigger bikes, you also gain a bigger fairing. Of course, they're built out a little bit more, and that bigger fairing is going to give you much better wind protection when you're cruising down the road. Now, most of my riding is not done off-road. If I'm going to do something off-road, I'm going to go buy a dirt bike. A YZ250F is one of my favorite bikes. I would go buy one of those if I was really going to do some off-road. The benefit on these adventure motorcycles is not that they are off-road bike. Unless you go into something like the KTMs, they really seem to be gearing towards that off-road market with a little bit of road. The 1290 Adventure is actually a bike that just rips on the road. That would be a great bike for you if you're looking to do more off-roading. Something else that's great about the heavier bikes on my GS, I absolutely love the fact that it is heavy. That's one of the greatest things about it. On my 800, you know, those lighter adventure motorcycles, you're getting a lot more pushback from the wind on the highway, and riding in heavy wind in that thing was virtually impossible, very painful on my back because I was really tense, really trying to keep it on the road. Whereas on the GS, no problem, cuts straight through that. I've got all the power to do it as well, and the bike is just more planted. I don't get pushed around as easily with the wind. So you are getting those longer haul capabilities on the bigger bikes. You're just getting more comfort. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around it. You are getting more comfort out of a bigger bike. That's just how it is. You know, normally you have a little bit bigger seat. I know you can get great seats on the, you know, Triumph Tiger 900 and a lot of the middleweight bikes now. But if you're looking at something like a Tenere 700, even KTM's, some of their lighter bike, anything that you're looking at, even the BMW 850GS, I've seen them, I've sat on them, I've ridden some of them, and you're just not getting as much comfort. You are more exposed to the elements because they're smaller bikes. If you're looking for something a little bit more robust and you are going to go middleweight, you might want to look at something like the 900 Rally Pro in the Triumph lineup, or you can even go with the BMW Adventure 800GS Adventure. They have an adventure model with a bigger tank, bigger fairing, and those things are quite nice. They do have quite a bit of protection on them. Of course, with a lot of the lighter bikes, you are not going to see anything with a drive shaft. I absolutely love drive drive shaft. I like that kind of power drive, that final drive, and I also love the fact that I don't have to be lubing any chains. Some people really like that and they're cool with it. That is just something I'm not keen on doing anymore, because once I've gone with a drive shaft, it's just not something I want to do. So that's something you won't get in a middleweight bike. As far as the long hauls go, again, on the bigger bikes, you are also going to have that option. On my bike, I do have the dynamic ESA, which is the electronic suspension. That stuff is amazing. If I ever want to adjust it, if I'm putting on extra gear, if I'm going on a longer haul, or if I'm riding with my wife, right? Two-up riding is way better, and loading that thing down with gear, you're gonna notice it a lot less than if you were on a middleweight bike. So the cons to having a heavyweight motorcycle is in the name, heavyweight. If I was gonna be living in a major city and I was gonna be cutting through traffic a lot, you know, I would probably opt for a middleweight motorcycle because they're a lot more nimble. And that's one thing I do miss sometimes, is how nimble and how maneuverable my 800 was. It was really easy to get around, really easy to split lanes, although I really don't have any problems, and I feel more confident splitting lanes on my GS, which is funny enough. I think has to do with the riding position, and the wider handlebars just really make you feel stable when you're going through traffic. And my GS is much bigger around with that boxer engine than the 800 because it's much slimmer, and I feel safer and I feel better about splitting lanes on my GS, strangely enough. One other negative that you're having with the heavyweight bikes, if you do any kind of off-roading or you do drop it, which I have dropped the GS, you got to pick it up, and picking that thing up, it is heavy, just like the name. And so picking those things up is a little bit daunting. There are some techniques you can learn. I actually threw out my back for the first time in my entire life picking up this motorcycle. It took me a couple days to get over it. It was really rough. I hated it. I'm much more careful now with how I pick that thing up. Be really careful when you're picking these things up, but that is another negative of the heavyweight bikes. Another thing about the con on the heavyweight bikes is these things do drink a lot more gas. So I say a lot more, you know, they definitely drink more gas. And something that people don't talk about a lot either, my yearly tax, my registration, and my insurance are both more expensive on the GS. So that's just something to consider. It's not a massive amount of money, but it is definitely a cost that most people don't talk about, but you are gonna get into that more expensive insurance, and as well and it is a much more expensive bike as well. More expensive insurance because of the size of the engine, and as well, more expensive yearly registration because of the size of the engine. So let's get into the middleweight bikes, and let's talk a little bit about the pros around those. The size, like I talked about earlier, is great for commuting. It's really nimble, really easy to cut in and out of traffic. It is definitely a motorcycle that's gonna serve you well if you like a nimble motorcycle. All right, so another thing that's really crazy is a lot of us are asking manufacturers and always complaining about how we want more horsepower, we want bigger engines, but then we complain when they come out with a bike that weighs more. And a lot, especially even the GS range from 2019 on, every year we're expecting them to give us more horsepower and less weight. Every single year, as we can see, we've been getting more weight every year. We want more features, less weight. Well, we can't demand both things from the manufacturers. We either want one or the other, because if you really want less weight, you really need to bump down into the middleweight class. If you want more horsepower, you really need to go up to a heavier bike. If you want something that's light, that goes really fast, man, you're not looking at an adventure motorcycle unless you're looking at the KTM 1290, and that's heavy. If you want something that's super light and super fast, crotch rocket's probably more your style. So let's talk about a few more pros of the middleweight bikes. Another thing that's really great is middleweight bikes are more off-roadable. They're much better off-road than a heavyweight bike. A lot of them come with 21-inch front wheels. Another thing is I find that off-road, I'm much more comfortable with something with a sprocket as opposed to a shaft drive. So I feel like the sprockets give you something a little bit more direct throttle response, and they just feel better off-road. I just feel like you're getting a lot more aggressive throttle response from something with a sprocket if you're doing more off-road. Also, that gives you the ability to change out sprockets, you know, front and rear, if you wanted to even tailor your throttle response even a little bit more. So that's just something to consider. And something else that's great about a middleweight bike is they're better for beginners, in my opinion. They're lighter, they have less power. So if you're a beginner just getting into the adventure market and you don't feel like you're confident enough to jump into a 1250 or a 1290 KTM, 1250 BMW, that might be a much better option for you to jump into a middleweight motorcycle. You still have a ton of torque, ton of power, great for off-road. You can still put a passenger on the back if you want, and you can still load a decent amount of gear on a middleweight bike and not feel like you're about to pop a wheelie. That is one thing I would say about my Triumph Tiger 800. It was an older bike, but when I had a passenger plus gear on the back of the bike, it did feel a little bit like it wanted to pop a wheelie the whole time, and the front end felt a bit squirrely, so I didn't like that. But I think a lot of the more modern bikes have figured out a lot of those ergonomics much better. Something else, if you are in the used market and you're looking at something like the F800 GS, which is the older middleweight GS GS version. And basically on those bikes, I have heard a lot of people complain if you go back far enough, I forget what years it is, they had the gas tank in the back. So actually you filled up the gas tank in the back of the bike. I think it's on the adventure model or whatever. And so they were trying to distribute the weight a little bit better for you, but I heard a lot of people say that it made the front end a bit squirrely because it didn't have enough weight on the front wheel. So it did feel a bit light to some people. So for me, a lot of the middleweight motorcycles that I would actually choose would be either the adventure version or the rally version or whatever they call in whatever manufacturer's lineup. But I would want to go that higher, get those bells and whistles that really make adventure motorcycle adventurous to me, whether it be electronics or a bigger gas tank, things like that. And my problem is I really love a 19-inch front wheel. And on a lot of those upgraded versions of those middleweight bikes, I know Triumph now has a road version you can upgrade to, but a lot of those versions of those bikes that I would want to upgrade with those bells and whistles have a 21-inch front wheel. And that's just not really, I want to be able to lean a little bit more. I want a little bit more stability in the front end. And I just feel like I'm not getting that. I don't take these bikes off road really. So 21 inches really don't serve me well. Obvious, another con to the middleweight bikes is they do lack power. Nothing around the city or anything like that, or even if you're by yourself. But I do feel when I'm trying to keep up with my friends on bigger motorcycles, the heavyweight motorcycles, I was feeling on the 800 like I really had to push my bike to get there. A lot of them cruise at much faster speeds. On the GS, it's like you don't even have to worry about it. It doesn't feel like you're pushing the bike too hard. It just wants to sit at those higher speeds. It likes it. On the middleweight bikes, I felt like I was really having to push it to keep up in those higher speeds on the highway and things like that. The highway is really where you're gonna see a lot of the power lack right there. You're just gonna feel like you don't have enough power, and I didn't like that. And the last thing I will say about middleweight bikes is I do feel like 2-up is a little uncomfortable on some of those bikes. They just don't have the suspension necessarily to keep up with it. I haven't tried some different bikes with the rally suspension, so it could be different, but I do feel like the heavyweight bikes have a much steadier feel when you're riding 2-up. And when I'm riding with my wife, it's excellent. Love the dynamic ESA. It's really awesome on the GS. Just really makes me feel planted, and I just have a ton of confidence in that thing when I have a passenger on the back. All right, so a couple of questions that you should be asking yourself when you're looking at a new motorcycle for you, when you're trying to debate between a middleweight or a heavyweight bike. Ask yourself, what type of riding are you actually going to be doing? Not type of riding do you wish you were doing, what type of riding are you actually going to be doing? Because that's really important. If you think of yourself as an adventure rider that does a lot of off-road, but you never really go off-road and most of your riding is city, well, maybe you should look at something that has more roadability than something that's more off-road oriented, that's not going to serve you well day to day, and you're going to end up being happy in the end. 2, another great thing to ask yourself is how much distance a year are you going to travel? You know, how much ground are you going to travel every year? Are you going to be doing a lot of long trips? Are you going to be doing mostly city with a few long trips here and there? So that's going to vary. You know, are you into long distance touring? If that's for you, definitely a heavyweight bike. If you're doing more city stuff and you're riding it as an everyday rider, you know, maybe a mid-size bike is better for you. I use my bike as an everyday driver. I absolutely love the heavyweight bike. It's perfect for me to maneuver around the city. I can get through Lisbon very easily, and it doesn't feel like it's a struggle to get around on the bike. I have tons of power. I love on the highway, I can get around really easily, and splitting lanes, like I said before, is not a big deal. So for me, heavyweight is also good for everyday driver. If you're a weekend warrior, maybe it doesn't really matter. You can kind of pick and choose whatever you're going to use, because either way, you're not going to use it a lot. And the last thing that not a lot of people think about is what features are non-negotiables for you. For me, the TFT was a non-negotiable on this bike, but it was worth it to me because I felt like it was going to last me longer, as far as before I was going to get tired of the bike and want a new one. So, and the dynamic ESA, things like that were really non-negotiables for me. I was willing to, once I decided where my bottom threshold was, then I had to either bring my budget up to it or say like, okay, I need to drop my expectations. In this case, I was able to bring my budget up to exactly what I was looking for and got the bike that I wanted. So there's a couple of questions to help you when you are looking around for a new motorcycle for you, either in the middleweight or the heavyweight range in adventure motorcycles. If you guys are wanting to see some of my other videos, I do have videos on why I love the GS and why I was selling my Triumph Tiger 800. So there's a couple of videos out there that you can go search for. I'll put the links in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching today, guys. It really means a lot when you subscribe and smash that like button, because it helps me so much with the videos. I know that you guys like the content, and it helps reach other people in YouTube. So please do that real quick. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Ride safe, and we'll see you on the pavement.